Ocean surveyors were stunned to discover a massive oil tanker wedged deep inside an underwater sinkhole. But when they cut through the welded doors of the captain's cabin, the shocking secret they found inside forced them to surface frantically and call the Navy immediately. Drop a comment with where you're watching from today, and don't forget to subscribe to see what's coming up next. The Macassar Strait does not hoard its secrets kindly. It swallows them whole, grinding them into the silt of the Wallace Line where the Pacific meets the Indian Ocean, a graveyard of currents where the temperature drops fast and the pressure builds even faster. To the uninitiated, the surface is just water, a rolling expanse of slate-gray waves under the Indonesian sun. But to Jake Perry, looking at the multi-beam sonar monitors aboard the RV Meridian, the ocean floor was a map of scars, a testament to violent geology and human error. Jake rubbed the grit from his eyes, the fatigue of a 3-week rotation settling into his bones like lead. At 45, he was too old for the cramped bunks of a retrofitted survey trawler and too qualified for the mind-numbing work of cable route mapping, yet here he was. The Meridian hummed beneath his feet, the diesel engines vibrating through the soles of his boots, a constant reminder of the mechanical tether keeping them from drifting off course. He adjusted the gain on the sonar, watching the waterfall display paint the seabed in false color blues and greens. "Anything, Perry?" The voice came from the hatch behind him. Marcus Vance, the project manager representing the telecom consortium, stepped into the darkened survey lab. Vance was a man who wore crisp polo shirts on a working boat, a detail that irritated Jake more than it should have. Vance didn't care about the geology. He cared about the schedule. Every hour the Meridian spent idling or investigating was thousands of dollars burned in fuel and crew wages. "Just seabed, Vance," Jake muttered, not turning around. "Mud, rock, more mud, the glamorous life." "We're behind," Vance said, checking his watch. "The client wants the route finalized by Thursday. If we don't clear the sector by tonight, we're eating the overage costs." "I can't map faster than the speed of sound allows," Jake retorted, tapping the screen. "You want a clear picture, or do you want to lay $100 million fiber optic cable over a jagged rock and have it snap in 6 months? Vance sighed, the sound of a man calculating spreadsheets in his head. "Just keep it moving. No anomalies, no historical interest sites. Unless it's a hazard to the cable, we don't care." Jake didn't answer. He had heard it all before. He was once the go-to guy for deep salvage, the man you called when a submarine went quiet or a prototype drone vanished. That was before the incident in the North Sea, before he claimed to see a vessel that radar said wasn't there, before the industry branded him burned out, reliable only for drawing lines on maps for internet cables. Then the sonar pinged. It wasn't the soft, rhythmic return of the mud. It was a hard, sharp return, a metallic bite in the soft acoustic data. Jake sat up straighter, his spine stiffening. He adjusted the frequency, narrowing the beam. The waterfall display shifted. The jagged, chaotic lines of the underwater ravine, a known geological fault zone, suddenly smoothed out into something geometric. A straight line, a 90-degree angle. Nature didn't make right angles, not down here. "Whoa!" Miller, the safety diver and tech assistant, slid his chair over. "Is that a glitch?" "That's not a glitch," Jake whispered. On the screen, a massive shadow appeared. It was colossal, a monolith rising from the darkness of the fault line. It wasn't just a rock. It had density, structure. The acoustic shadow it cast was long and sharp. "Vance," Jake said, his voice dropping an octave, "you need to see this." Vance leaned in, squinting. "What is it? A shipping container?" "Too big," Jake said, his fingers flying across the keyboard to drop a digital marker. That looks like a hull. A big one." "A wreck?" Vance groaned. "Great. That means we have to divert the route. How far around do we have to go?" "Look at the positioning." Jake pointed to the depth readout. "It's sitting at nearly 300 feet, wedged right into the mouth of that sinkhole. If we lay cable here and that thing shifts, it takes the line with it." "So we go around," Vance said dismissively. "We can't just go around," Jake argued, the old salvage instincts flaring up. "That's a massive metallic signature in a shipping lane that shows clear charts. If it's a recent sinking, there could be fuel. There could be people." "It's 300 feet down, Perry. If there were people, they're gone," Vance snapped. "We mark it, report it to the Indonesians, and move on." "It's not on the charts, Vance. Look at the navionics." Jake pointed to the secondary screen showing the clean blue overlay of the region. "No reported wrecks in this sector. Nothing. A ship that size, looks like a tanker, doesn't just vanish without a distress call. I need to verify what it is. If it's unstable, it threatens the entire cable integrity for 5 miles in either direction." Vance stared at the screen, the dollar signs warring with the liability. "How long?" "Give me 12 hours, Jake lied. He knew a dive to that depth with decompression would take all day. "I go down, ID the hull, check stability, we come up. You get your survey data, and you get to tell the client you avoided a catastrophic lawsuit." Vance clenched his jaw, looking from Jake to the sonar image. "You take Miller. You follow strict protocols. If this is just a pile of rocks you're hallucinating, Perry, you're paying for the fuel." The preparations for a dive to 300 feet, 91 meters, were not a matter of simply strapping on a tank and jumping in. It was a ritual of survival, a mathematical negotiation with physiology. At that depth, the pressure is 10 times that of the surface. Oxygen becomes toxic, causing seizures. Nitrogen becomes a narcotic, as potent as a dry martini on an empty stomach for every 10 meters of depth. On the aft deck of the Meridian, the tropical heat was suffocating, but Jake felt cold. He was in the zone. He and Miller were prepping their closed-circuit rebreathers, CCRs. Unlike standard scuba, which vents bubbles and wastes gas, rebreathers recycled every breath, scrubbing out the carbon dioxide and injecting tiny sips of oxygen and helium. "Oxygen sensors calibrated," Miller said, his voice tight. Miller was 28, fit and arrogant, but he had never been past 200 feet. The abyss was a different beast. "Check the diligence," Jake ordered, inspecting Miller's rig. "You trust the computer, but you verify with the analog. If the solenoid sticks open at depth, you have seconds to react before you tox out." They were breathing Trimix 1050, 10% oxygen, 50% helium, and the rest nitrogen. The helium would keep their heads clear, thinning the gas so it could flow through their lungs under the crushing pressure, but it also stripped body heat away 20 times faster than air. "Suit heaters on," Jake said, connecting the battery pack to his dry suit. "It's going to be 40 degrees down there." Elena, the topside comms officer, stood by the rail, holding the umbilical that would provide hardline communication. "We're holding station directly over the target, Jake. Current is 3 knots at the surface, dropping to 1 knot below the thermocline. It's pushing south-southeast. Don't fight it." "Copy that," Jake said, pulling the heavy mask over his face. He checked the seal. He took a breath. The loop tasted like warm plastic and silence. Splash time, Jake said. He stepped off the platform. The water of the Macassar Strait closed over him, warm and blue at first, a deceptive embrace. As they descended the shot line, the world transformed. The chaotic noise of the surface waves faded, replaced by the rhythmic, mechanical click-hiss of the solenoid injecting gas behind his head. At 100 feet, the light began to die. The red spectrum vanished first, turning the blood in his veins to looking like black ink. At 200 feet, they hit the thermocline. The water shimmered like oil, a boundary layer of temperature density. Passing through it was a physical shock, the temperature plummeting from 80 degrees to 45 in seconds. Jake cranked his heated vest up. At 250 feet, the darkness was absolute, broken only by the piercing beams of their HID dive lights. "Target in sight," Miller's voice crackled in Jake's earpiece, high-pitched and cartoonish due to the helium in their mix. Jake looked down. His heart hammered against his ribs, a slow, heavy thud. The sonar had not lied, but it hadn't prepared them for the reality. Looming out of the gloom was a wall of steel. It was vertical, covered in a chaotic tapestry of barnacles, soft corals, and sea fans. It wasn't lying on the bottom, it was wedged. The sinkhole was a jagged mouth in the ocean floor, two tectonic plates pulling apart. The ship, a massive oil tanker at least 400 feet long, had nosedived into the fissure. The bow was lost in the eternal darkness below, and the stern was stuck against the lip of the cliff, holding the entire vessel upright like a tombstone. "God Almighty," Miller breathed. It's hanging there." "Watch your buoyancy," Jake commanded, his own voice steady despite the awe. "Don't touch the structure. We don't know how fragile that wedge is." They drifted closer, two tiny specks of light against a mountain of dead iron. The scale was terrifying. The propeller, a massive bronze flower, hung motionless in the black water. Jake hovered near the rudder. "Look at the prop," Jake said. "No growth." "What?" "The hull is covered in 10 years of coral." Jake pointed his light. "But the blades, they're clean, polished. This ship was running hard when it went in, and not 10 years ago. Recently." "How is that possible?" Miller asked. "Look at the rust on the hull." "That's what we're here to find out." They finned up the side of the hull, ascending toward the superstructure. The ship was a ghost. No fish swam near it. The ocean life seemed to avoid the metal, swirling around it but never touching. There was a low, mournful groan resonating through the water, the sound of thousands of tons of steel under stress grinding against the rock of the sinkhole. "I don't like this sound, Jake," Miller said. "It's unstable." "We just need the name," Jake said. "Then we leave." They reached the stern transom, the place where the ship's name and home port should be welded in proud steel, high letters. Jake scrubbed at the marine growth with a gloved hand. Nothing, not worn away. Removed. "It's been ground off," Jake said, shining his light across the scarred steel. "Angle grinders. Someone took the name off down to the bare metal before painting over it." He swam to where the IMO number, the ship's unique fingerprint that stays with it from launch to scrap, should have been embossed on the hull. He found a rectangular plate of fresh steel welded over the spot. "This isn't a wreck, Miller," Jake said, a cold realization settling in his gut darker than the water around them. "This is a disposal, a crime scene." "Jake, look at the bridge," Miller called out. They swam up to the tower of the bridge. The windows were dark, encrusted with silt, but the heavy steel, watertight door leading into the superstructure was peculiar. The rust around the door frame was different. Lighter, orange. Jake pulled himself closer, fighting the subtle pull of the down current fallen into the sinkhole. He ran his finger along the seam of the door. "Welded," Jake said. "They welded the doors shut from the outside." "To keep water out?" Miller asked. "Or to keep something in," Jake corrected. "Or to make sure whoever was inside didn't get out when they scuttled it." The mystery had shifted from a navigational hazard to something far more sinister. Jake checked his dive computer. They had been at depth for 20 minutes. They had maybe 10 minutes of bottom time left before their decompression obligation became unmanageable. "We need to see inside," Jake said. "We need the logbook or a flag state document. Otherwise, Vance sweeps this under the rug." "We can't get in," Miller protested. "It's welded." Jake reached to his equipment belt and unclipped the Broco tactical torch, a specialized underwater cutting tool he carried for cable entanglement. "That's why I brought the key." "Jake, the noise, the heat, if there are pockets of gas inside." "We cut a small inspection hole. 1 minute. If it's flooded, we leave. If it's dry, we go in." Jake struck the magnesium rod against the striker plate. A brilliant, blinding white flare erupted in the darkness, burning at over 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The water around the rod boiled instantly, creating a violent, shuddering cloud of steam and bubbles. The sound was a roar, a chainsaw tearing through the silence of the abyss. Sparks of molten steel flew like underwater fireworks, illuminating the terrifying drop of the sinkhole below them. In the periphery of the light, Jake saw shapes moving. 6-foot Humboldt squid, attracted by the flashing light, hovering in the darkness with basketball-sized eyes, watching. He ignored them. He focused on the bead. The steel of the door yielded, molten slag dripping away. He cut the latch mechanism. It took 3 minutes, eating into their precious air supply. With a final clunk, the heavy latch fell away. "Doors free," Jake panted, the effort spiking his CO2 levels. "Help me pull." They braced their fins against the bulkhead. The door groaned, the rust seal breaking. A rush of bubbles escaped from the top of the door frame. Air. "It's not flooded," Miller shouted. "There's air inside." "Equalize," Jake yelled. The pressure differential sucked the door inward slightly as the water rushed to fill the void. They rode the door open, tumbling into the bridge. Jake expected a rush of water, corpses, rot. He expected the chaos of a sinking. He didn't expect the hum. They floated into the captain's cabin, their lights cutting through the murky water that was now swirling in from the open door. But the water was only filling the floor. The upper half of the room, trapped by an air pocket, was dry. And it was alive. Not with people, but with machines. Jake surfaced his head into the air pocket. The air was stale, smelling of ozone and hot electronics, but breathable. He switched his rebreather to surface mode and spat out the mouthpiece. "Look at this," Jake whispered. The bridge of the rusty 40-year-old tanker had been gutted. The ship's wheel was gone. The navigation charts were gone. In their place were racks of black server blades bolted to the deck and ceiling. Cables ran like black snakes across the bulkhead. And on the captain's desk, kept dry by the air pocket, a console was blinking with a steady, rhythmic green pulse. "It's a server farm," Miller said, popping his head up beside Jake. "On a tanker?" Jake waded through the waist-deep water toward the desk. The contrast was nauseating. The rotting, barnacle-encrusted exterior hiding this pristine, high-tech nerve center. He wiped the condensation from a monitor screen. It was active. A map of the world was displayed, with hundreds of red dots moving across the oceans. "It's not just servers," Jake said, reading the telemetry data scrolling on the screen. He recognized the software. It was a military-grade GNSS spoofer. "It's a transmitter." "Spoofer?" Miller asked. "It fakes GPS signals," Jake explained, his mind racing to connect the dots. "This ship, it's a broadcaster. Look at these IDs." He pointed to a cluster of red dots near Singapore. "According to this, the tanker Oceanic Pride is currently docking in Rotterdam. But look at the coordinates." He tapped a key. The real coordinates flashed. The Oceanic Pride was actually off the coast of Iran, loading oil. "This is a ghost ship," Jake realized, the magnitude of the find hitting him harder than the pressure outside. "They use this wreck as a relay. It sits here, hiding in the sinkhole, powered by—" "What?" He looked down. Heavy cables ran through the floor. "They tapped into a geothermal vent, or they have a massive battery bank down in the hold. It broadcasts fake location data for an entire fleet of illegal tankers. They can move sanctioned oil, weapons, anything, and on the trackers they look like they're 1,000 miles away. That's why the hull is old, but the prop is clean," Miller said. "They drove it here, wedged it on purpose, and turned it into a static base." Jake turned to the wall safe behind the desk. It was open, likely left that way in the haste of the final evacuation. He reached inside. He pulled out a bundle of flags: Panama, Liberia, Togo, Sierra Leone. Flags of convenience. Beside them were stacks of logbooks. He grabbed the top logbook. It wasn't a standard ship's log. It was a handwritten journal. Entry 412. "They told us the welding is for our safety, to protect the equipment, but the air is getting bad. The company says the pickup boat is coming before the scuttle. I hear the hull groaning. If they don't come soon, we are buried with the servers." "They didn't just scuttle the ship," Jake said, his voice cold. "They welded the crew inside to keep the secret. Then they sank it." "So, where are the bodies?" Miller asked, looking around nervously. "In the hold," Jake said. "Or they got out before the final drop." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the ship. It sounded like a gunshot, magnified by the water. The deck tilted violently beneath their feet. Miller slipped, splashing into the water. "What was that?" "The bubbles," Jake yelled, shoving the logbook into his dry suit pocket. "Our exhaust. The air pocket. We introduced fresh oxygen and turbulence. The rust seal is breaking." The ship wasn't just resting. It was balanced precariously. The disturbance of their entry, the temperature change, and the vibration of the door opening had upset the delicate friction holding the tanker in the sinkhole's jaws. The floor dropped. A sensation of weightlessness hit them. The entire ship slid downward, scraping against the rock walls with a shriek of tearing metal that vibrated through their very teeth. "Get out!" Jake roared, jamming his mouthpiece back in. They dove back into the water, kicking toward the door they had cut open. But the door was gone. The ship had slid 10 feet down. The opening was now blocked by the solid rock wall of the sinkhole. They were trapped inside the bridge. "Blocked!" Miller screamed into the comms, panic rising in his voice, his breathing rate spiking. "We're trapped, Jake. We're dead." "Stop it!" Jake grabbed Miller's harness, shaking him hard. "Look at me. Control your breathing or you'll die of CO2 hit before the ship crushes us. Breathe." The ship groaned again, tilting forward. The water level in the room was rising as the air pocket compressed under the new depth. The green lights on the servers flickered and died. The darkness returned. absolute and suffocating. "Secondary exit," Jake commanded. "Starboard side, the bridge wing door." They swam frantically through the maze of server racks, cables snagging on their gear. The ship was tilting at a 45-degree angle now. Debris, chairs, coffee mugs, manuals floated past them in a surreal slow-motion storm. They reached the starboard door. It was jammed, twisted by the torque of the hull twisting. "Kick it," Jake signaled. They braced their backs against a server rack and kicked the handle with both fins. Once, twice. The metal shrieked. The ship lurched again, falling another 20 feet. The pressure in Jake's ears popped painfully. They were going deeper. If they went too deep, the mix in their tanks would become toxic. They had to get out now. Jake saw a porthole. The glass was thick, reinforced, but the frame was rusted. The tank! Jake grabbed a spare bailout cylinder, a heavy steel tank of gas clipped to his side. He unclipped it. Smashed the glass. Miller understood. Together, they swung the heavy steel tank like a battering ram. Thud. The glass starred. Thud. A spider web of cracks. Thud. The glass imploded. The water rushed out, sucking them toward the small opening. "Go," Jake shoved Miller. Miller squeezed through the jagged opening, his dry suit tearing on the glass, a stream of bubbles escaping. Jake followed, the equipment on his chest scraping painfully against the frame. He got stuck for a terrifying second, his rebreather loop catching. He twisted, exhaling fully to shrink his chest volume, and popped through into the open ocean. They were free of the ship. But they were in the abyss. Jake checked his depth gauge. 340 feet. They had fallen 40 feet deeper. "Up," Jake signaled. "Slowly, to the line." They swam away from the wall, looking back. The massive tanker was still sliding, disappearing into the throat of the sinkhole, kicking up a massive cloud of silt that swallowed the stern. The servers, the evidence, the tomb, it was all being buried. "We lost it," Miller said, his voice trembling. "We lost the proof." Jake patted his chest pocket. The logbook was there. But a book wasn't enough. They needed the digital key, the encryption. He looked down at his belt. When he had been at the desk, instinctively, purely on muscle memory from his salvage days, he had grabbed something else. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a hard drive he had ripped from the main console right before the slide. "Not all of it," Jake said. "The ascent was a torture of patience. You cannot rush from 340 feet. The physics of dissolved gas demanded they pay their toll. They hung on the decompression line in the blue void. Stop at 100 feet. 5 minutes, stop at 70 feet. 10 minutes, stop at 40 feet. 20 minutes. The cold seeped into their marrow. Miller was shivering violently, the early stages of hypothermia. Jake kept a hand on him, watching his eyes for signs of a seizure. As they reached the 20-foot stop, the final, longest wait, Jake looked up at the hull of the Meridian. The water was clear enough to see the propellers. He also saw something else. A small Zodiac boat was in the water next to the Meridian. Men were leaning over the side, looking into the water with view buckets. "Jake?" Miller's voice was weak. "Who is that?" "Not the Navy," Jake said. He tuned his comms radio, bypassing the standard channel and listening to the bridge frequency. He heard Vance's voice. "Divers are still down." "Yeah." "No, they saw it. I need to know if I cut the line or pull them up. If they bring anything up, it compromises the operation." "Understood." Jake went cold. Vance wasn't just a cheap project manager. He was a contractor for the syndicate. He was the cleaner. He had sent them down to confirm the site was safe, not to find it. And now that they had found it, they were a liability. "Miller," Jake said, his voice hard as steel, "listen to me. When we surface, do not hand them the drive. Do not hand them the logbook. You played dumb. You were scared. You saw nothing. Got it? They're going. To kill us, Jake." "No," Jake said, "because we have insurance." Jake reached for his dive knife. He cut the hard drive out of its waterproof bag. He took the dummy weight from his belt, a block of lead, and put it in a spare bag. He shoved the real drive deep inside his dry suit against his chest. 2 minutes to surface, Jake said. They broke the surface into the blinding tropical sun. The heat hit them like a hammer. Vance was at the rail, looking down. 2 crew members Jake didn't recognize stood behind him, arms crossed. "You're late," Vance called out, his smile not reaching his eyes. "What did you find?" Jake spat out his mouthpiece, gasping for real air. He let exhaustion wash over his face, playing up the terror. "It was a death trap," Jake yelled, grabbing the ladder. "The whole thing came down on us. We barely got out." He hauled himself onto the deck, Miller following, shivering and blue-lipped. "The anomaly?" Vance asked, stepping closer. "Did you ID it?" "Some old rust bucket," Jake lied, collapsing onto the deck, making sure the dummy bag clinked against the metal. "Collapsed the second we touched it. It's gone, Vance. Slid into the hole. If we'd been there a second longer." Vance looked at the divers, then at the water. "Did you bring anything up?" Jake paused. He reached for the bag with the lead weight. He held it out. "Just this," Jake said. "Scrap metal from the door. Wanted to prove we were there." Vance took the bag. He felt the weight. He opened it, saw a jagged piece of rusty steel, which Jake had indeed grabbed. Vance relaxed. He tossed the bag overboard. "Garbage," Vance said. "All right. Get out of the suits. We're moving to the next sector." Vance walked away, pulling his phone out. Jake waited until Vance was inside the bridge. He grabbed Miller. "Get to the comms room. Lock the door." "What are you doing?" "I'm making a call." Jake bypassed the ship's main radio, which Vance monitored. He went to the emergency satellite uplink in the secure server room, a room only the captain and the surveyor had keys to. He plugged the hard drive into the isolated terminal. The screen flooded with data. It wasn't just location data. It was financial records, bank accounts in the Caymans, names of politicians in Jakarta and Manila. It was the ledger of the Dark Fleet. He found the frequency for the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet, currently conducting exercises in the Philippine Sea. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday," Jake spoke clearly into the mic. "This is Survey Vessel Meridian. We have discovered a Class A maritime hazard and evidence of hostile spoofing operations, requesting immediate assistance. Priority code." He read the code off the screen from the hard drive. "Sierra Tango 19. There was a pause. Static. Then a crisp American voice cut through. "Meridian, this is USS Milius. Verify priority code." "Code verified," Jake said. "I have the keys to the kingdom, and I have a hostile on board." The sun was setting when the horizon changed. It wasn't a storm. It was a gray shape, moving fast. Vance was on the bridge, screaming at the captain to get the engines running to leave the area. But the Meridian's engines were dead. Jake had pulled the fuel cutoff in the engine room 20 minutes ago. The roar of a helicopter shattered the evening calm. A Seahawk helo buzzed the deck, the downdraft whipping the sea into a frenzy. Behind it, the knife-like bow of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer cut through the waves. Vance ran out onto the deck, pale. He looked up at the helicopter, then at Jake, who was standing by the winch, a cigarette in his hand, his first in 5 years. "What did you do?" Vance hissed. "I finished the survey," Jake said calmly, "and I mapped the route straight to prison." Boarding teams fast roped onto the deck. The professionalism was absolute. Within minutes, Vance and his security goons were zip-tied. An officer approached Jake. "Mr. Perry, that's me. The Admiral sends his regards. You found a needle in a haystack, son. A very expensive needle." Jake reached into his suit and pulled out the hard drive, now dry and warm. He handed it to the officer. "Careful with that. It's got the location of every ghost ship from here to the Persian Gulf." 3 days later, Jake stood on the dock in Macassar. The Meridian was impounded. The story was international news. The Sinkhole Syndicate, the papers called it. Miller walked up, looking clean, rested, and distinctively less arrogant. He held 2 beers. "You saved my life, Jake," Miller said, handing him a bottle. "You saved yourself, kid. You kept your head." Jake took the beer. "So," Miller looked out at the ocean, "Navy offered me a job, consultant for their hydrographic division. They want to know if I want to work with you." Jake smiled. The weight on his shoulders, the shadow of his past failures, was gone. The ocean hadn't just taken the tanker, it had taken his bad luck with it. "Tell them I'm expensive," Jake said, clinking his bottle against Miller's. "And I don't do sinking ships anymore." He took a sip, the taste washing away the salt. The Macassar Strait looked different now. It wasn't just a graveyard. It was a vault, and for the first time in years, Jake Perry held the combination.